The Iceberg tier. It's been around YouTube for quite a while now and it's still very popular. Its premise is that at the tip of the iceberg are things that are commonly known. However, as we descend deeper, we uncover more mysterious, unknown, and sinister facts. I went around YouTube to find any iceberg videos concerning geopolitics and I found basically nothing. So, kinda pioneering this genre of iceberg videos, today I'm gonna be looking at all things that can be associated with geopolitics. Wars, battles, incidents, countries, flags, you name it. And the result is this iceberg, which I'm going to explain to you today. This is the ultimate geopolitical iceberg. Starting with things everyone or most of you might have heard of, we're gonna descend deeper into things that may be forgotten, mysterious, or downright dark. Without further ado, let's begin the journey. Tier 1. The Suez Crisis. Since the Suez Canal was built, it was controlled by the Suez Canal Company and effectively the British. That was until 1956, when the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the canal. The British, unhappy with the loss of the revenue from the canal, devised a plan with France and Israel to retake it. On October 29th, Israel invaded Egypt, pushing them to the canal. However, the British and the French intervened too early, giving away their part in the plan. This humiliated them on the international scale, and Nasser began to be seen as the leader of the Arab world. The Football War. I made a whole video about this topic, so I'll just glance over it briefly. Tensions between the two countries escalated after El Salvador knocked Honduras out of the 1970 World Cup qualifiers. El Salvador, facing a huge refugee crisis, blamed the Hondurans for it and declared war. After 4 days of fighting, a ceasefire was signed. Korean Air Flight 007. Korean Air Flight 007 was a routine flight from New York City to Seoul with a stopover in Anchorage. The aircraft departed from Anchorage on September 1st, 1983, 4 AM local time. 10 minutes after takeoff, the flight started deviating from its course and entered Soviet airspace. Around 5 hours and 26 minutes after takeoff, the plane was shot down by a Soviet missile, killing all 269 people on board. This marked one of the tensest moments of the Cold War. Treaty of Sèvres. The Treaty of Sèvres was a World War I treaty signed on August 10, 1920, between the Allies and the Ottoman Empire. In this treaty, the empire was divided between Britain, France, Greece, and newly independent Armenia, with the British, French, and Italians having massive zones of influence in the region. A possibility of an independent Kurdish state was also brought up, and Istanbul was to become an international demilitarized zone. Unsurprisingly, the Turks were not happy with these terms, and, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, started a war of independence, which shaped Turkey's modern borders. Tier 2. Castro's assassination attempts. Fidel Castro was the leader of Cuba from 1959 to 2008 and the arch-nemesis of the US. Being a communist state just off the coast of Florida meant that numerous attempts at ending Castro's regime were inevitable. After the failure that was the Bay of Pigs invasion, the CIA devised a simple plan: assassinate Castro. And as you might have guessed, they failed. How many times? Exactly 631 times. The few murder plans the CIA's store were poisoned cigars, a pen that would stab Castro, a poisoned milkshake, an explosive seashell, or an infected diving suit. Castro died in 2016, not from the hands of the CIA, but from being an old man. Destroyer of Worlds. J. Robert Oppenheimer was an American scientist and a member of the Manhattan Project. For his role in the project, he was named the father of the atomic bomb. On July 16, 1945, the first nuclear bomb, Trinity, was detonated. After the explosion, Oppenheimer muttered the now famous quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The Soviet coup. In 1991, as the USSR was slowly falling apart, there was an attempted coup d'etat in August. The coup began after the KGB, with Gennady Yanayev in charge, detained Mikhail Gorbachev and created a state committee on the state of emergency. The coup lasted for a total of 4 days and was an absolute failure, mainly because the Soviet people strongly opposed it and Boris Yeltsin was at the forefront of the opposition. The coup resulted in Ukraine and Belarus declaring their independence and accelerated the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Vasily Arkhipov. Vasily Arkhipov was a Soviet Navy officer who might have, unknowingly, saved the world from a nuclear war. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the submarine he was on was detained by the US patrols and was ordered to resurface, which the Soviets declined. Surrounded by US ships and having lost contact with Moscow, some officers on the sub mistakenly thought the war has broken out. 2 of the officers gave the green light to launch a nuclear torpedo against the US ships. However, Arkhipov refused to authorize it. The sub resurfaced and was ordered to come back to the USSR. Tier 3. United Arab Republic. The United Arab Republic was a short-lived union of Egypt and Syria, created as a part of Nasser's Pan-Arabism movement. Established in 1958, the country's politics were majorly controlled by Egypt, and in 1961 Syria declared independence. Egypt continued to function under the UAR name until 1971. After that, there were 2 more unsuccessful attempts at uniting the Arab states. The Federation of Arab Republics, a union between Egypt, Syria and Libya between 1972 and 77, and Arab Islamic Republic, a proposed unification of Libya and Tunisia in 1974, which never came into effect. Miracle on the Vistula. During the Russian Civil War, the Bolshevik Red Army led by Lenin and Trotsky began undoing the 1918 Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and started moving their troops west to Belarus, Ukraine and Poland. After the Polish and Ukrainian forces captured Kiev, the Soviet troops started pushing westward all the way to Warsaw. There, on August 12, 1920, the Battle of Warsaw began, with the Polish forces successfully repelling the Soviet invasion and even pushed the Soviets back. On October 18th, the Soviets sued for peace. The battle, which is seen by many as the one which prevented the westward expansion of communism, is known as the Miracle on the Vistula. Liberia's county flags. Liberia is a country on the coast of West Africa and comprises 15 counties. Now, I'm pretty sure you are all familiar with these flags, but much less is discussed about their origin. The flags were introduced in 1965 by William Tubman, the president at the time, for the purpose of promoting the counties as meaningful entities. Their design was inspired by Liberia's quilting tradition. The flags were designed between 1961 and 1965, not by the central government, but each flag was designed by respective local governments and was overseen by special committees. This one is my favorite, it has a nice diamond. 335 Years War. When you hear about a war lasting that long, you probably think of bloodshed. However, in this war between the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly, no one was even injured. After the British royalists were pushed out of the mainland by Oliver Cromwell in 1651, the Dutch navy, allied with the parliamentarians, came knocking. Not to finish them off, but to demand reparations. Or else. They declared war on the royalists and they were in a standoff. However, in June 1651, the parliamentarians forced the royalist navy to surrender, and the Dutch, no longer under threat, sailed away. No peace treaty was signed until April 17, 1986, making it one of the longest wars in history. Tier 4. Nuts. Anthony McAuliffe was an American general who commanded the artillery division of the 101st Airborne Division in World War II. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the Germans launched a surprise counterattack and trapped his forces at Bastogne. On December 22nd, General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz sent a group of attachés to deliver an ultimatum to the Americans, which called on their troops to surrender, or else the Germans would annihilate the US troops in and near Bastogne. McAuliffe read the message, threw away the paper, and reportedly said, "Oh nuts." One of his men suggested that it was an appropriate response, so they sent it as their official reply. Since then, McAuliffe was remembered for this one praise. Argentina vs Peru 1978. In the second round of the 1978 FIFA World Cup, Argentina was drawn against Brazil, Poland and Peru. The winner would go straight to the final and the second place team would fight for the third place. Before the final two games, Argentina and Brazil were tied in first place, both with 3 points, with Brazil leading on goal difference. On June 21st, 4:45 p.m. local time, Brazil beat Poland 3-1, increasing their goal difference from +3 to +5. For Argentina to advance to the final, they would have to beat Peru by at least 4 goals. They won 6-0, advancing to the final. The problem? The tournament was hosted in Argentina, which was a dictatorship at that time, and before the game, the Argentinian leader, Jorge Rafael Videla, visited the Peruvian squad. The most common theory is that the Peruvians were either persuaded or bribed to lose by a large margin to help Argentina qualify for the final. The other theory is that the governments of Argentina and Peru made an agreement for Peruvians to lose in exchange for a large sum of money. Argentina won the final, beating the Netherlands 3-1. North Korea is ruled by a corpse. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kim Jong-un is very much alive. His title, however, is General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea, not president. In fact, North Korea only had one president, Kim Il-sung. After he died in 1994, his son Kim Jong-il was not given the position. Instead, it was abolished in 1998, and Kim Il-sung was given the title of Eternal President. After Kim Jong-il died, he was given the title Eternal General Secretary. So even though Kim Jong-un assumed the powers of his predecessors, by constitution he is not the leader or president of North Korea. Ceausescu's final speech. Nicolae Ceausescu was a long-time communist dictator of Romania. In 1989, during the wave of democratization, Romanian leaders still ruled with an iron fist, which culminated in the brutal crackdown of the protests in Timișoara. A few days later, on December 21, 1989, Ceausescu gave a speech broadcasted live in Bucharest, condemning the uprising. In one moment, the crowd became restless, and there were reports of Securitate, the special forces, firing at the ones who tried to disperse. The live broadcast was cut as Ceausescu and his wife Elena began to panic and after a while fled. The restless crowd soon began rioting and kick-started the Romanian Revolution, which ultimately saw Nicolae and Elena captured and executed. Tier 5. A bear fought at Monte Cassino. During the Battle of Monte Cassino, the Polish army enlisted an unlikely help of a bear. The Polish army found Wojtek in 1942 in Iran and actually enlisted him into the army to surpass the British limitations on ships. During the Battle of Monte Cassino, Wojtek helped by carrying heavy ammunition crates. For his service, he was promoted to a corporal, and his depiction became an official emblem from the 22nd Company. After the war, Wojtek was transported to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he lived the rest of his days. Al-Saadi Gaddafi. Al-Saadi is the son of a long-time Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi and is best known for his football career. Between 2000 and 2003 he played in his country for two Tripoli teams. The games were fixed for him to win, referees always favored his decisions, and security forces were dispatched to disperse all protests and riots. In the 4 seasons he contested, he won 3 championship titles. In 2003 he signed for Perugia, making 1 appearance and failing a drug test. In 2005 he signed for Udinese, making 1 appearance again, and in 2006 he signed for Sampdoria, where he didn't play a single match before ending his career. He was also the president of the Libyan Football Federation. He fled the country after the civil war and was captured in 2014 in Niger, extradited to Libya before being released in 2018. Eurovision 1974 Portugal. The 1974 Eurovision Song Contest is mostly known for ABBA's breakthrough, but not enough attention is given to the song which placed last, E Depois do Adeus by Paulo de Carvalho. At the same time as the contest was taking place, tensions were rising in Portugal as the Estado Novo regime, led by Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, was slowly falling apart. The Armed Forces Movement, or the MFA, led by Otelo Saraiva de Carvalho, was preparing a military coup d'etat. The date they set for the revolution was to begin on April 25th. 5 minutes before midnight, E Depois do Adeus was played on the radio, which was the arranged signal for the rebels to mobilize. 20 minutes after midnight, after hearing the second signal, the rebels launched military operations and kick-started the Coronation Revolution, which would eventually lead to Salazar being deposed. Mongolia's annexation to the USSR. Between 1924 to 1992, Mongolia was a communist state, but on several occasions they were willing to give up their sovereignty. The main advocate for this was the leader, Yumjagin Tsedenbal. However, the Soviets always refused to annex the country, especially after the Sino-Soviet split when Mongolia sided with the USSR. Moscow saw this as a leverage that they could take advantage of. Also, Mongolian exports were vital for the Soviet economy, and for them, having one more communist state on their side in the international community was better than having yet another Soviet republic. As such, the Mongolian People's Republic remained independent until a revolution in 1990 forced a change of government. Tier 6. Carpatho Ukraine. Carpatho Ukraine was a short-lived and unrecognized nation established on March 15, 1939, during the breakup of Czechoslovakia. The leader, Augustin Voloshin, appealed to the Nazis for recognition, but never received any response, as on the same day, Hungary invaded them. The vastly superior Hungarian army crushed the Ukrainian resistance, and by March 16th annexed the country. The region of Carpatho Ukraine remained under Hungarian control during the entire World War II, before being transferred to the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. The 20s are a cursed decade. This might be just a coincidence, but both 1920s and 2020s were not pleasant for humanity to endure. Don't believe me? In 1920, the fourth wave of the Spanish flu hit the world. In 1921, Hitler became the leader of NSDAP. In 1922, Mussolini assumed power in Italy, and then, after a few years of calmness, in 1929 the Great Depression hit. Now let's fast forward 100 years and see what we've got. In 2020, the coronavirus forced a worldwide lockdown. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and now in 2023, we see a sudden surge in popularity of right-wing parties in Europe. Is history repeating itself? What will happen in 2029? Only time will tell. Matthias Sindelar. Matthias Sindelar was an Austrian footballer regarded as one of the greatest Austrian players. After the Anschluss on April 3, 1938, Nazi Germany staged a propaganda match between them and Old Austria, which included Sindelar. The Austrians missed several opportunities on goal, seemingly deliberately. However, in the last 20 minutes, they managed to score 2 goals. One of them belonged to Sindelar. Sindelar, filled with patriotic rage, is claimed to have celebrated his goal in front of Nazi dignitaries. This was his last international game, as he refused to play for the German team. On January 23, 1939, he and his girlfriend were found dead in their apartment in Vienna. Official cause of death is listed as carbon monoxide poisoning, but many suspected he was murdered by the Gestapo for his opposition to the Anschluss. The Death Match. Staying with the football team but going forward in time to 1942 and German-occupied Ukraine. The Kiev team called Start, composed mostly from players of Dynamo Kiev and Lokomotiv Kiev, faced off in a series of games against the German side called Flakev. The first game took place on August 6th, with the Start team being Flakev's 5-1. The Germans ordered a rematch on August 9th, with the Start team winning again, this time 5-3. This very game became known as the Death Match, because on August 18th, the Gestapo arrested some of the Start players. 2 of the players died in 1942 from the hands of the Gestapo. 8 were sent to a concentration camp in Sirets. 3 of the 8 would end up executed. The match itself is shrouded in mystery, as there is no actual proof that the players were arrested and killed because of their victory. It's on this layer of the iceberg purely for its mystery and sinister character, just like the case of Sindelar. Now, before we continue deeper, a content warning. The following points concern topics such as mass murder, rape and genocide discussed in detail and with pictures being shown. If you're sensitive or don't feel comfortable about such topics, click away now. Tier 7. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On February 14, 1929, at Lincoln Park in Chicago, 7 men were lined up against the wall and murdered. The victims were all members of George Bugs Morgan's North Gang, which was a rival gang to the Chicago outfit led by Al Capone. The perpetrators were never identified, although many suspected the Chicago outfit to at least play a role in the massacre. This was the bloodiest incident of the 1920s gang warfare in the United States. The Nanjing Massacre. The Japanese advance during the Second Sino-Japanese War was rapid, and by early December 1937 they reached the Chinese capital at that time, Nanjing or Nanking. After taking the city, the citizens of Nanjing were subject to one of the most brutal massacres the world has ever seen. Starting on December 13th, the Japanese soldiers wreaked havoc across the city, executing Chinese soldiers and civilians en masse, raping girls and women, and looting the city. The Japanese engaged in so-called killing games to see who could kill 100 people with a sword faster. It is estimated that 20,000 women, including children, were raped, and about 200,000 people died in the massacre. For their role in the massacre, General Iwane Matsui, General Hisao Tani, and Prime Minister Koki Hirota were tried and executed for war crimes. The Rwandan genocide. By 1990, Rwanda was a one-party state ruled by Juvenal Habyarimana of Hutu descent. The area of Rwanda was populated by three tribes: Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa. In 1990, a civil war broke out with Paul Kagame and Fred Rwigema being the main rebel leaders. During the civil war, a movement called Hutu Power emerged and began radicalizing anti-Tutsi sentiments. In October 1993, the Hutu president of Burundi was assassinated by Tutsi extremists, which escalated ethnic tensions in the region. And on April 6, 1994, an airplane carrying Habyarimana and the president of Burundi was shot down. It is disputed who shot down the plane, but the fact that both victims were of Hutu descent gave the Hutu Power an opening to begin exterminating the Tutsi population of Rwanda. Theoneste Bagoroza, now in charge of the country, gave the go-ahead. Their goal was to kill every Tutsi living in Rwanda, and they did this with extreme brutality. The victims were usually killed with machetes, rifles, grenades, or even burned alive. It's estimated that up to 800,000 Tutsis were massacred in 4 months. Khmer Rouge. The Communist Party of Kampuchea, known internationally as Khmer Rouge, was a far-left political party led by Pol Pot. They assumed power in Kampuchea in 1975, and their radical policies led to deaths of about 2 million people. Under his rule, the government purged about 50 to 70% of men. Anyone suspected of having connections with the previous government, intellectuals, even wearing glasses could get you killed. But the main target were minorities: Vietnamese, Thai, Chinese, Cham, and Christian Cambodians were targeted for persecution and genocide. The regime also exploited children and teens to conscription and taking part in the genocide. Many people were also subject to torture in so-called Security Prison 21. Children would be taken away from their relatives and taken to killing fields, which were basically mass graves, and executed there on the spot. The official estimates of the victims oscillate around 1.8 million people, which was about a quarter of the population of Kampuchea. This makes the Khmer Rouge, at least in my opinion, the most brutal regime in history. And that's the end of this video. I know things might have gotten a little bit dark at the end, but that's the main feature of Iceberg Tears. Anyway, thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe to the channel, especially after that long break. I have lots of ideas in my head and I can't wait to share them with you. Until the next time, peace.